For years, these Canada geese have been a seasonal fixture in the sky above Los Alamitos and Cypress as they make their way down the Pacific Flyway seeking the last open fields and wetlands of West Orange County. Some of these wetlands are located around the Los Alamitos racetrack area, known as the LART, north of Catella Avenue in Cypress, providing habitat for geese and other migratory birds and local species. But the geese do not fly into this area anymore. In January, after one of the largest of the LART properties, these 33 acres you see behind me just off Catella, sold, immediately traffic engineers descended on Catella on the Cypress side and began installing synchronization and sensor gear in anticipation of a signal at Enterprise and Catella. At the same time, pumps were brought in to drain and denude the natural habitat, the marshland behind us, entirely of its wetland area to make way for the bulldozers and the cement trucks, and ultimately something that looks a lot like this. This proposed trucking distribution center plan is one of many modern logistic operations across the world that have been built by the international company Prologis, one of the big players in the movement and storage of goods for retail clients just as big, companies like Walmart and Amazon. The plan, as presented originally by Prologis and supported by Cypress City officials, was to quietly acquire 33 acres of previously zoned public open land and transform it into a proposed 725,000 square foot cluster of warehouses with rapid throughput capability for up to 129 truck bays operating 24 hours a day to service the growing and increasingly competitive wholesale and retail goods delivery industry. With hundreds of trucks moving in and out daily, it would effectively double the number of trucks pouring out on West Orange County's major arterial, Catella Avenue, and would be the westerly extension of the sprawling complexes of warehouses known as the Cypress Business Parks. And, if all went according to plan, maybe, magically, nobody would notice. Any proposal for a logistics operation of this magnitude could not be kept a secret for long, and even before the planning process could begin, the zoning restrictions on the land itself would have to be wrestled from the public under a previously established 1987 measure mandating voter control over the public and semi-public zoned Los Alamitos racetrack area. Under 1987's Measure D, no parcel of these 300 acres of publicly zoned lands at the LART could be rezoned for commercial development except by a vote of the people. In its one-page ordinance, the end of the first paragraph establishes the voter's intent and says it short and sweet. Quote, Proposals to develop our diminished and irreplaceable greenbelts and open spaces must be constrained for the sake of ourselves and our future generations." Unquote. Today, still with no master plan for developing the LART, any scheme to override such a broad public mandate as Measure D has historically attempted to do so one parcel at a time through the initiative ballot process. Through that process, the City of Cypress has been extremely supportive and at times an active participant in support of these rezoning initiatives.
If there's no questions for staff, I need to.
The Cypress City Council is uniquely empowered to manage such land use decisions as rezoning, acting without a civilian planning commission, conducting their internal business through non-televised pre-council meeting workshops. With little oversight and minimal public interaction, they have allowed property owners and developers great latitude in the execution of their rezoning campaigns and special elections to bring those initiatives forward to the voters in Cypress, while claiming absolute impartiality.
Communication out there, and these are not our initiatives. They are initiatives that are brought by the property owners, as stated in Measure D. So,
then Cypress Mayor Doug Bailey talks to Time Warner's local edition just before the now infamous June 2012 Measure L vote and explains the broad powers his council enjoys.
Easy to do business. And,
correct.
I hear that it's a lot easier to do business in Cypress than some other cities.
That's correct.
How do you do that?
Well, we established, well, first of all, we don't have a planning commission. So, you know, any improvements, building improvements that a business would need to make come directly to the council. So we're able to fast track accommodations. And then we have quarterly BRACE meetings with our larger businesses. And BRACE is something we established about 5 years ago. And it stands for Business, Retention, Attraction, Creation, and Expansion. And it's all about getting together with the large corporations in our town and, you know, what's working for you, you know, what help do you need, you know, especially, you know, maneuvering through the ever tangled web of government and agency problems that you could have.
With this, we'll start the oral communication, and our first speaker, Christo Bardis.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the council. My name is Chris Bardis. I am one of the proud owners of the golf course.
While landowner Chris Bardis was working his way through his tangled web of government problems, he began talking with developer Prologis through a Los Alamitos real estate broker. At about the same time, he launched his first rezoning initiative campaign, Measure L, and dispatched paid signature gatherers and canvassers to promote the measure as a popular senior housing proposal that included this fully formed site plan for a senior village to be shared with an office park, all the while omitting the very real possibility of an industrial use for this site buried in the legal language of the 160-plus page Measure L.
Measure L was not a city council project. Measure L was a voter-initiated project that was accomplished by the owner of the property, which is subject to Measure L. The owner of that property gathered signatures to qualify to put this measure on the ballot.
Meanwhile, City Attorney William Winder had written a so-titled impartial ballot analysis to aid the voters in objectively assessing the merits of Measure L. In his short analysis of the rezoning measure, he mentioned senior housing no less than 4 times, along with some other community and general retail uses. But at no time in the ballot summary, which he acknowledged later he wrote with the input of the proponents, nowhere were the words industrial, warehouses, or even trucks mentioned.
Redevelopment project area without approval of the residents of the city of Carson. Cypress. Wrong city. Close enough. That process
That slip of the tongue by the city attorney, referring to Cypress as City of Carson, may have been unintended, but it was not altogether unrelated. Years ago, Carson was also a middle-class suburban community of homes for port and refinery workers who made a good wage and could float a family and a mortgage. Then the trucking companies came, and the place mushroomed into a massive distribution hub, such as the two Prologis facilities we see here in Carson. They call logistics centers. Now, the place is an unending parade of trucks of all sizes, and all in a hurry to get somewhere. On June 5th, 2012, Measure L Cypress voters overwhelmingly approved a zoning change on the 33 acres of the Lart along Catella from public and semi-public to something called mixed-use commercial zoning, thinking that they were voting for upscale retirement housing with medical and support facilities, only to discover many months later they had okayed a potentially light industrial zone that paved the way for Prologis. The voters never saw it coming. Eleanor and Manfred Stein are two Cypress residents who were approached by signature gatherers for Measure L back in 2012. Both say they feel tricked into voting for L, thinking it was senior housing.
He was very enthusiastic about the whole thing. He told us how wonderful it was. He did not tell us anything that might make us think that it was a bad idea. So I signed it finally. I think I went there twice, and the second time I signed it. Well, once I put the pieces together, I really feel ripped off, cheated, and I don't trust anybody anymore, and I certainly wouldn't sign any more petitions in Cypress for anything after this experience, because what I said and expected was going to happen certainly got switched into something entirely different, and it's just wrong.
Okay. Right after the June 2012 Measure L victory, Mayor Doug Bailey once again visited the Time Warner studios and proclaimed the success of the rezoning vote as paving the way for light industrial development, never mentioning the phantom senior housing plan emphasized by the city attorney in his ballot measure that drew voters to pass the measure in the first place.
And we're in talks with a couple of groups, large national real estate investment trusts that want to expand our business park down there. It could add upwards of 660,000 square feet of light industrial, commercial.
It'd be nice to have that revenue. It'd also be nice to have the jobs.
It would. We did an economic study before we put it on the ballot, and it appears that under the scenario that we're discussing, it could bring upwards of $50 million of economic activity over the next 5 years. So, it's
the economic report former Mayor Bailey refers to was commissioned by the city staff and presented during a city workshop in February, 5 months before the Measure L vote. It reviewed the fiscal impact of the upcoming Measure L and studied 4 scenarios for the rezoning of the 33-acre parcel in terms of financial benefit to the city. Turns out independent fiscal consultant Andrew Chang found that it was in fact a retail shopping center that would offer the greatest revenue return to the city and generate the second most jobs. Light industrial, as was heralded by then Mayor Bailey and now proposed by Prologis, came in last in both categories. Overnight, Measure L, depicted even by the city as a senior housing initiative, had morphed into a plan for a sprawling industrial warehouse zone that would soon become a massive proposed truck terminal. That by even conservative estimates, like those of former Cypress Councilman Mike McGill, would double the heavy traffic along an already impacted Cantella Avenue on the south, as well as Cerritos Avenue on the north.
I would only offer that you take a serious look at the impact of when you take a facility with 124 truck bays and you essentially double the truck traffic that's going to come out of the business park with one building. That's a significant impact. The people in Los Alamitos were concerned about Costco. It's got 4 truck bays. I'd like to tell them, it worked out okay. But in this case, I would like to suggest to members of the council they take a serious look at the impact that it's going to have on our community and not always look at the revenue, because the revenue is important, but in this case, it's a quality of life issue.
It would also double the value of the land and the profits of seller Chris Bardis, who had purchased it dirt cheap in 1989 as public zoned land, and then sold it at close to $1 million an acre as industrial zone, courtesy of the Cypress voters and Measure L. At the very least, the rezoning of the 33-acre Parcel 9 of the LART moved control of public use lands out of public hands and into private pockets with the passage of Measure L. A classic case of land use politics wherein one could say, the large print giveth, and the small print taketh away. And sometimes the takeaways are felt in ways that cannot be measured on a spreadsheet. Cypress resident Joyce Baker, longtime community volunteer, was one of many voters who signed on to Measure L, thinking a senior housing development would be a godsend for her, and a way to remain in Cypress after she sold her home of 43 years she could no longer maintain.
And now I'm 81 years old and sick and have no help, no one to do anything, no family or anything, and I've got this huge house, huge area, huge yard, and I was so looking forward years ago when you talked about the senior housing over there, because all of us have nowhere to go, that we were looking forward to have something for the seniors, a smaller home. We don't have to do all the yard, we don't have to do all this, and yet we can have a little home. I'm just very disappointed. We certainly don't need a lot more trucks. We need some facilities for seniors. There's a lot of us out here that have nowhere to go.
With the zoning change, Prologis resumed negotiations with property seller Bardis, and by December of 2012, escrow closed with plans already in place to develop a 3-building complex with 129 offloading truck bays, a total of 725,000 square feet of warehouse, distribution, and truck terminals, along the lines of these massive structures now operating in Carson, California, and elsewhere around the world. It would be another 3 months into 2013 before even avid local citizen observers of Cypress city government would get wind of the magical transformation of the 33-acre plan.
And I think that's part of where a lot of the anger, although it's really not being
And to add
shown here
insult
tonight, which I
to
think is
injury,
pretty good,
they would
actually.
have to hear it from their westerly neighbors in Los Alamitos, who saw it as an imminent threat to their residential communities just across the street, and to the already developing gridlock that plagues their main thoroughfare, Catella Avenue.
Our next speaker, Louis Waddell from Los Alamitos.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm asking to have a handout passed to you. It's your site map for the Prologis Trucking Center on Catella, and it's also the news release by Prologis.com, which is on their website, for the Tracy Center outside of San Francisco for the 1 million square foot facility that they're building for Amazon.com. I'd like to say, first of all, Amazon.com is now, because of the loss of the sales tax to California residents, they are advertising on their website that there is a one-day turnaround for anything that you've ordered. I'm giving you the site map because I would like you to be sure to use a magnifying glass and to count the bays, the trucking bays in there. They're awful tiny to see. In Building 3, there are 64 truck bays. In Building 1, there are 32 truck bays. And in Building 2, there are 28, making approximately 125 truck bays. At the open house meeting for Prologis.com, they were telling us that the trucks would be unloaded twice a day. So I don't know, if a semi, twice a day, 250 semis come in, and they are loading 2 delivery trucks, that's an awful lot of trucks. It's an awful lot of trucks trying to get into this building. And if you will look at your site plan and really look at it carefully, 725,000 square feet. These are huge buildings capable of massive turnaround distributions.
It wasn't long before Cypress citizens were calling foul too. In the first mandated public outreach on April 3, 2013, just days before the city's month-long public comment period that nobody heard about closed, folks on both sides of Catella had their first opportunity to see the fruits of last year's Measure L vote in a pre-environmental impact scoping meeting at a local church on the racetrack grounds, and they were already not liking the taste. Okay, talking with one Cypress resident, Paula English, who is here. Are you here to get some information or to impart some information, Paula?
Mostly to get information. The City of Cypress residents don't seem to know a lot about this so far, and I've been pretty involved with the city, and I wasn't aware of it until the last couple of weeks. So basically, it was just, there's already such a buzz about what's going on, and to get accurate information, I think, is really important. So that's why I was here.
Are you getting information tonight?
Not tonight. Hopefully, I'm not sure exactly what happened tonight, but the information that people were supposed to get wasn't given out. It was...
Well, do you think it's possible that Cypress officials maybe don't have the information that they need to be able to pass it out to an event like this, a scoping meeting in advance of an EIR tonight, to be able to pass out to folks?
I think that's a good possibility, and I talked to Doug from the city, and that's basically what he was saying, was that they don't have the exact information yet. But I think it would have been a good idea if that had been said. You know, this was supposed to be a meeting to get information, and a lot of people showed up, and there wasn't really any information given out.
Just as local residents were getting an eyeful of what Measure L had wrought, another special election was coming their way and aiming to rezone more parcels on the Lart north of the Prologis site, aiming to rezone this time the other half of the old Cypress public golf course, as well as 11 acres of the racetrack parking lot for commercial use. And again, with the intent of removing public control over the zoning destiny of approximately 47 acres this time, fast-tracked, to use Mayor Bailey's term, into a special election endorsed by the council and pushed from behind financially by the same property owners that brought forward the controversial Measure L a year earlier.
Start again. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Chris Bardis, and I am one of the proud owners of the golf course. My comments will be very brief.
It is called Measure A, and as word got out in late March, Cypress Council meetings that previously drew single-digit audiences began packing protesters in. Through April, May, and into June, it was standing room only in the Cypress chambers, with angry residents from surrounding Los Alamitos, Seal Beach, Rossmore, and even Buena Park, but especially with Cypress residents themselves, who were just learning about the Measure L bait and switch, as many were calling it.
To people in this community, and all of them said shops, restaurants, and offices. Nobody said a warehouse. Nobody said anything about trucking.
And now, highly suspicious of yet a new measure endorsed by the city to likewise rezone the Lart, but this time, citizens were pushing back.
We cannot accept more large trucks so close to our neighborhoods.
And right now, the system seems broke to me.
Because you spend a lot of money doing this EIR and the many other studies. Why don't you get, our okay? I don't think anybody in the right mind in the city would approve this kind of project, especially from open space to industrial stuff. I mean, what kind of right mind you guys have?
I work in the city of Carson. I grew up in the city of Bellflower. I work for a company who has their own logistics facility. They have 12 bays. Okay, they have 12 bays. one company, we unload and load 400 diesel trucks a day. That's not going to be 400 diesel trucks coming down Cerritos Avenue. That's going to be 1,000 trucks coming down Cerritos Avenue, empty and full. They're not going to be nice, big, shiny, light-covered, over-the-road diesel trucks that we all see going to Arizona on Interstate 10. These are going to be beat-up, raggedy, probably unsafe port commercial vehicles. And in about 4 years, when Cerritos Avenue looks like Dominguez Avenue in Carson, then the city council is going to feel like they need a commercial vehicle enforcement officer within their budget. And then this council will be asking us as citizens to give you money to buy a commercial vehicle law enforcement officer to patrol the beat-up street of Cerritos because of the raggedy commercial vehicles that are up and down that street.
There is compelling and recent evidence that local communities in Cypress and Los Alamitos are already seriously compromised by diesel-generated emissions. A statewide study conducted by the California Environmental Protection Agency in its Cal Enviro spreadsheet identified Cypress's 90630 zip code as being in the 79th percentile of worst California cities for, among other pollutants, small particulate diesel emissions. Los Alamitos, in the 90720 zip code, was just behind in the 78th percentile of the worst of the very kinds of diesel emissions the Prologis project would generate on a 24-hour cycle. In a modern throughput truck distribution center, high levels of diesel particulates are generated by a constant flow of trucks from the massive tractor trailers that haul goods in to the smaller bobtails and step vans that disperse them out to an increasingly and ever-demanding consumer market. More docking bays means more trucks, means more pollution. But what would constitute an acceptable level of pollution? And how close is too close to place such facilities near where people live? The California Air Resources Board has compiled a number of epidemiological studies to answer these questions and formulate them into an air quality and land use handbook as a source and guideline for municipal and county use in California. In it, ARB finds markedly reduced lung function in children in proximity to truck density, especially trucks within 1,000 feet. And among other related health issues, Cal Enviro documented that increased asthma hospitalizations were associated with living within 650 feet of heavy truck traffic. As for ARB's land use recommendation with regard to truck distribution centers, they say always avoid citing new sensitive land uses within 1,000 feet of a truck distribution center that accommodates more than 100 trucks a day. From a westerly aerial view, it can be seen that residential homes on the Los Alamitos side of Catella, on the right, are already within ARB's 1,000-foot critical zone of the proposed Prologis distribution site in the middle of your screen. Existing cypress homes north of the LART are just beyond as the crow flies, until the wind blows, and it almost always blows north. So what is an acceptable level of diesel pollution? Maybe that question is answered best by those who treat the victims of it.
Christine Arfwetson.
Good evening, City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I am a professor of nursing for Cerritos College. My specialty is pediatrics. It's wonderful to know that our mayor is a physician. So as you consider the effects of this project, Think of what it will do to the health of the children. I know that you are very responsible in finding revenues for the many services that we all enjoy in this city. However, if we can't breathe the air outside of our homes because we have trucks and 3 plants that we do not know what those plants are going to manufacture, which could further bring more emissions, I'm not sure anybody here really would realize what it's like to be a pediatric nurse for decades. And part of the joys and also part of the heartbreak is to watch parents hold their children dying of cancer with the ravages not only of the disease, but of chemotherapy and radiation, and they are helpless. But you are not helpless. You have the moral responsibility to make decisions that will bring health to your residents, not just tax revenue. There's always another project that we can get money from. This is not a good fit for a residential area. It will be a disaster for the children that go to the elementary schools, the middle schools, and the high schools here, and our streets already have many, many trucks. Mayor, as a physician, I'm sure you know the studies reflect that diesel small particulate emissions are breathed in. They embed themselves in the lining of the lung tissue, in the vessels that bring the blood to the body. They are potent carcinogens. I don't know how an EIR will have any way to mitigate hundreds of trucks coming to this city. You will kill your children, and you all live here. This is your families, these are your children and your grandchildren, and this is very real, and I don't care what committee is inciting this community. You need to be extremely careful about what you approve, because your voters, your residents' health is in your hands.
Brought forward by the same landowners who created Measure L and endorsed by city officials without any open discussion, Measure A could have amounted to more of the same outcomes voters got last year in Measure L. More industrial zoning replacing public lands.
Given the vagueness of what this development could ultimately morph into, I don't want this in my community. I've always appreciated.
But this time, residents banded together under the battle cry, "Won't get fooled again," to at least try and save these parcels from being turned into truck bays.
Can you imagine if the truck bays turn over even 3 to 4 times a day? That could mean almost 500 more trucks to our streets every day.
Like the once teeming wetlands of the 33-acre site, now drained and denuded, this land is facing the same fate under Measure A. Also once part of the public golf course, now dormant for years, these 30-plus acres along Cerritos Avenue are in the process of returning to nature. With the grandstands of the Los Alamitos racetrack in the background, I'm walking a footpath here that meanders in and out of a 30-acre parcel that is part of a larger zone called the LART Business Park Development Zone. This parcel lies just north of the proposed Prologis Trucking and Distribution Center. Now, we've looked at that a little bit earlier in the program. All of this acreage, years ago, was zoned public and semi-public land, and this area here was actually a golf course, complete with lakes and streams and even some walking bridges. Well, as you can see, the lakes are still here, 3 of them to be exact. Not a difficult proposition to maintain. The water table in this area is notoriously high, but the land itself has been allowed to go back to nature and return to the native grasslands, the wildflowers, and the wildlife that have rejuvenated here right along with the land. After 10 years of basically being left alone, this forgotten landscape has begun to be reclaimed by Mother Nature herself, slowly returning this land to its natural native balance. Recalling a time in Orange County when life was simpler and time moved much more slowly. Precious little of that time and place still remains, particularly here in West Orange County, for us and for our children. But here, of all places, it survives and even thrives. These lakes and hills are in jeopardy now under Measure A. Like other Cypress residents, George Pardon was perplexed and then angry that neither the property owner, the developer, or even the city bothered to inform the public that Prologis and its trucks were coming thanks to Measure L. Now, facing Measure A, Pardon and the Citizens for Responsible Development didn't just get angry this time, they got organized, meeting in community centers and homes around the city, and then took their opposition to Measure A as well as Measure L and their combined potential for an industrial takeover of the LARD directly to the council that had previously ignored them. How did you become aware that this even was an issue, that this was a problem, and when did you become aware of the urgency of this land use matter?
Well, I became aware of it in late March when the Prologis development, which was actually Measure L, voted on by the citizens of Cypress a year ago, was brought to the attention of the Los Alamitos residents because they were interested in some access off of Catella. And so some of the folks in Los Alamitos were urgently bringing the attention to the local community papers and distributing flyers in the community. And it was at that time that I became aware of actually the 33-acre development initially and went to the initial scoping meeting for that project, which was held on April 3rd, which is when we first got our first glimpse of what this project could be, and that is the 33 acres. At that point in time, knowing that it was the same property owners for Measure L that it was going to be for Measure A, which again, as we thought with Measure L, that it was going to be senior housing, we had similarly been told by signature gatherers that Measure A was going to be primarily single-family housing. So it's really where I then went back and looked to see how could Measure L, which everybody believed was going to be senior housing, how could it become a project such as what Prologis was developing. So as I read through that and realized that the land uses were allowing a project of that magnitude, then it immediately drove me to look at Measure A and found that it was the same property owners, the same lawyers, and virtually only 6 pages difference in length, which exceeded 160 legal-size pages. And you didn't even get the land uses until you got to page 63. Someone could have told us, at the point in time Prologis acquired this property, somebody knew it wasn't going to be senior housing, because one thing for sure, no matter what you look at what Prologis does, they don't build senior housing. So as soon as the property was sold to them, it could have been made clear to the community that whatever is sought after for the development of that property, someone from planning or someone from the city could have informed us just for clarification that it wasn't going to be senior housing, because that isn't for sure the business that Prologis is in.
Right. What's different in your mind about Measure A here in 2013 that dispels your fears that ultimately were realized with the loss of senior housing under Measure L?
It was recognizing at that point in time that given the language in Measure A, we were going to have the potential for a very similar outcome, and that's where the outrage came. And it was ultimately with Measure A sitting down with the property owners and negotiating deed restrictions on this property that made the full implementation, or the kind of bait and switch potential that ultimately the residents believed happened on Measure L, we prohibited that from happening via the deed restriction process, whereby regardless of what the flexibility and latitude that Measure A would provide in the event that it is passed by the voters, that it would not be, that latitude would not be permissible on this property, because this property with the deed restrictions is limited in perpetuity. Specifically, the 30 acres we're standing on now is for single-family housing. And
faced with such a broad groundswell of dissent, property owner partner Chris Bardis has stepped forward to offer a guarantee of sorts, at least to local neighborhood activists on the Cypress side, offering residential zoning restrictions for parcels along Cerritos Avenue, addressed in Measure A. He's offering irrevocable covenants and restrictions on the land that would guarantee residential development and some local support retail zones, and most importantly, no extension of trucking facilities, at least along Cerritos Avenue, at least for now.
That will not expand the existing zoning other than for single-family residential use. There will be no truck stops, there will be no industrial development, there will be no traffic going through there or trucks. That 30 of the acres will have a restricted covenant in perpetuity. And it's a good project, it's a good use for the land, and I hope we can somehow get continued support from the council and as well as support from the public. I am willing to meet with anybody at any time to discuss the project and bring it forward.
good evening. My name is George Pardon, and I'm here to publicly thank the property owners and as well as the City Council and City staff as we have worked diligently to put these deed restrictions in place, and would appeal to the City Council tonight to vote in support of those deed restrictions and also gain insurance that they are enforceable. I think that's
George Pardon and company want desperately to believe landowner and developer Bardis. George goes so far as to say the homes promised by Bardis under Measure A and dedicated in the restrictive language of the deed, if built, will also serve to frustrate the potential expansion of the Prologis plan that looms over the entire LART. But even George has his moments of uncertainty. But, that's not game over, is it?
No, absolutely not. I think that as we look at this, even the Measure L Prologis project as well as the Measure A project, those are just actually not even large pieces of the larger piece of property that stands here under the Los Alamitos racetrack. Actually, behind me is the racetrack itself, and at some point in time, as Hollywood Park has seen its closure, Del Mar racetrack is seeing its closure, it's very easy to predict that at some point in the not too distant future, that although I really actually enjoy coming to the racetrack, that its days are likely numbered or its years are numbered. And so these are, again, the same property owners that brought us Measure L, that brought us Measure A. And I think that they know now that the community is wide awake, that they are listening very carefully, and if they ever want to bring a project back to this community to develop the 100+ acres that are the remaining racetrack, that they had better keep their promises under the Measure A deed covenants.
Prologis officials have also made attempts to engage the business and government communities in both Cypress and Los Alamitos in an apparent attempt to adjust their facility plans to some level of operations that would be, as Prologis spokesman Pat Maloney puts it, responsive to the community.
The business community. The feedback that we've been getting strongly is really that it's overly generic, that it's overly broad in terms of what kind of product this is, and that it might attract businesses that the community doesn't want to have in this location. And that really is boiled down to traffic and trucks. And the project that we originally designed next door is a big project. So you're talking about 33.
He told a Cypress Chamber gathering recently, Prologis is in the process of a scaled-back redesign of their 33-acre site that, when it rolls out, will definitely not, as Maloney says, be a truck bay terminal. Though it will still have trucks and truck bays, apparently just fewer of them. As of this report, no such redesign by Prologis has been brought forward. Before the promise of Measure A that would turn nature's handiwork at the Three Lakes into 160 upscale homes behind a guarded gate, before Measure L and its promise of senior housing turned massive truck terminal, there was Measure D and its promise of open land sustained for all time for ourselves and our children, it said, in the opening paragraph of the original 1987 measure that gave the people of Cyprus dominion over its fate. That is the promise this man would like to keep. Ed Kramer is a soft-spoken computer programmer who commutes to the city of Carson for work and says he sees what the trucks did to that city and appreciates the suburban community life he's made for his family here in Cyprus. He's added his voice to the chorus of critics over the commercialization of public lands on the Lard, and says he doesn't understand why Cyprus citizens are voting away their control of the last open public use lands in their city with little to show in return.
I'm at the corner of Moody and Cerritos at the entrance to Seacoast Grace Church. This little road I'm on right here, if Measure A passes, could be run through all the way to Catella, right past the 11-acre commercial zone that's in Measure A, right past the back 9 here, around the racetrack, all the way to the other side as a throughway to Catella. And it could house truck traffic that would run right. It opens up the last section of the puzzle to come through into Cyprus with trucks from a commercial facility. We have what I call open space equity in this area. There's a value in having just plain open space. It's open public space. When it was a golf course, when it was a golf course, there was equity in being able to go on the golf course, and there's equity in the green grass. Right now, there's just equity in plain open space. There's a sea breeze coming through right now. It comes over the airport and right through this area. And right now, we've got a 5 to 7 mile-an-hour breeze that's going through here, and it blows right into Cyprus. That's value, that's equity that we'd vote away for no reason that I can see if we vote on A. So what I would like to see, is instead of piecemeal voting away parts of this Measure D land, I'd like to see us come together as a community, come together as a business community, work with our neighbors, and I'd like to see us come up with a plan that lays out the use of this open space area so that there's a return on our granting the owner the right to make a hefty profit off of what he bought as open space land and now can sell as commercial or residential. But for what the city of Cypress, what the residents are giving up, I'd like to see a park or, I think in the interest of the racetrack, an equestrian center with a horse trail, sports complex, something that retains the public use equity, the open space equity, open space public use equity of this land.
Not everyone is blaming the property owner or the developer for the piecemeal buy-off of the last of Cypress's open land. Nancy Killingstad doesn't live across the street from the LART, but she does live downwind of the diesel emissions it would bring. She points her finger directly at her own city council for not informing the community of what was coming.
My name is Nancy Killingstad, and I'm a longtime resident of Cypress. I want to know what has happened to my city council, the council that's supposed to be representing the residents of Cypress and what the residents wanted under Measure D. Not your own agendas, agendas that aid and abet big corporation and property owners in bringing in a massive trucking distribution center and squeezing it in between two residential communities. How is this in the best interest of the residents of Cypress? Even after Measure A, I, for one, will continue to fight for the last open land in Cypress at the LART, even if I'm the only one left doing so.
This meeting was held as required by the California Environmental Quality Act, also called CEQA. CEQA requires that the project undergo a thorough analysis before it is considered for approval by the city. This process encourages input from all parties who are interested in the potential impact of the development. The initial scoping meeting marked the beginning of the many steps that will be necessary before this project can be considered by the city council.
And, you know, people, you know, go to the meetings, they get riled up and want to come, but we as a council can't really comment on anything that's because there's been no project presented to us. That would be prejudicial in a, you know, in a hearing perspective. So we don't have a project. There is no Prologis project. From what I understand, they've withdrawn their application. They're going to come back and start a scoping process all over again. But I'm going to go out on a limb here and tell you that as long as I'm on this council, I would find it extremely difficult to vote for anything that looks like a truck depot, a truck stop, some sort of heavily truck using thing. I wouldn't do that.
What Cypress City Council officials claim as prudent caution in avoiding any public discussion on the Prologis site until an EIR can be completed, many citizens of Cypress have gradually come to perceive as a willful disconnect that favors the developers.
Proposition L was marketed as a housing development for senior citizens, and this is not what it's turning out to be. This is a violation of public trust. Proposition A is now marketed as a housing development. I think the residents of Cypress need to know specific details of both propositions before the vote.
The council has gone to extraordinary lengths to accommodate and to enable the property owners at the LART to conduct elaborate and somewhat misleading off-calendar special elections seeking to rezone specific parcels out of public hands. They abandoned their cloak of neutrality by fully endorsing Measure A, and even went so far as to place advertisements on the city website for tenant-leased warehouse space on behalf of Prologis. Though neither building plans or even a preliminary EIR for the project have been approved yet by the city. What started as a trickle of complaints have become a steady stream of public disaffection evident at every Cypress City Council meeting since March. Where it will end is anybody's guess.
The amended general plan for those acres, and again, industrial, not the will of the people. Where, oh where, is my city council? The people I put in office or allowed to stay there to promote what I think is best for our community. What if you were put here in this moment to bear the great moral responsibility of the protection you're called upon to bear, to leave this city better than you found it? Use your incredible gifts. You have them. Use them. You have so much power here. Broker a new deal. Buy the land back for the people to use as Measure D intended. This is the protection of your stewardship. This is your patrimony. This is your moral responsibility. Put something there that there's a void for here in Cypress.
When it comes to land use zoning politics, it's easy to get lost in a minefield of contradictions. Private property versus public use, revenues versus quality of life, common law versus common sense. The battles that are being fought right now over Measure A and Measure L are just part of a much larger tug-of-war that will continue on here at the LART. The largest of those battles that looms will be over this area behind me, the Los Alamitos racetrack and grounds, 138 acres, that when it closes, will face the same complications and the same challenges as A and L, but with one added urgency. It will be, at that point, the last large, open public land Cypress will ever see. The ponies still run here at Los Alamitos 3 nights a week, and they still draw a crowd to this sport of kings, but not like it used to be. It takes a king's ransom to run a track like this, where operational expenses outweigh the take on most nights. It's daily off-track betting that really sustains the place, according to facilities manager Frank Sharon. When the time comes, will this track be bartered off in pieces, as the Prologis site and the Three Lakes parcel are? Or will the experiences of Measure L and A finally galvanize the citizens of Cypress who, as George Pardon has stated, are wide awake now and listening very carefully? The LART is the last of the open land God gave this place. There's no more where it came from. Whether it is carved up piece by piece and sold to the highest bidder, or saved from the bulldozers to create some kind of public space, it may be time, it may be just in time, for the citizens of Cypress and beyond to come forward and contemplate a zoning master plan of their own for all of the remaining LART area while they still can. You can bet the developers are. For Backstory, I'm John Underwood.